Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to be finishing Sven Vanderplank's BattleTech lore, specifically the Age of War, the complete 500-year history. Last time around, we got to Kurita getting peace out of the Age of War faster than anyone else, and yes, it seems weird to me to say that. But Sven came with the receipts. Next up, we have the Davian Civil War, which I've been told is absolutely insane, and is something that apparently repeats itself many times whenever a weak Archon comes around. Yeah, I haven't apparently known nearly as much about Davian as I thought, so this is all new to me. I'm really excited because apparently it's bullshit. After that, we're going to finish this up with the birth of the Star League, and I'm kind of looking forward to that because the Star League's freaking cool, man. Wasteful, overabundant, incredibly stupid, but goddamn, do they waste on some giant freaking mechs, man! You know where my priorities lie. So we're going to jump right in, see where this goes, and I mean, it's going to Star League, so I'm enjoying this already. You guys know the deal. Link below, original video, hit it up. Let's get started.
The Davian Civil War may well be the darkest chapter in the history of the Federated Suns, and potentially...
Wait, out of everything that happened, that's the darkest?
Certainly it dwarfs the other major conflicts of this era in terms of scale and
this era, okay.
With the rule of the largest interstellar nation going to the victor. It would begin with
Nothing
the kidnapping of the heir apparent by one of the regents sworn to protect him, and end with single combat to the death between two allies that had fought the war together. Though we know it today as the Davian Civil War, two alternate titles might have been the War of the Regents or the War of the Five Princes. The Federated
Was George R.R. Martin a BattleTech fan? Because that seems, might familiar. I mean, granted, history has similar things like this popping up, and that's what BattleTech's based on, so it could be just a similar basis from what they were drawing from history in general, but at the same time, Martin was trope aware enough when it came to Lord of the Rings. Why not other things that drew from pop culture? I think I'm just talking myself into this the more I say anything, huh? I need to look this up later.
Suns had managed to keep its nose clean throughout most of the 25th
Game of
century,
Space
allowing
Thrones.
it to peacefully expand outwards and in time become the largest of all the great nations. Certainly there were border disputes and raids with their neighbours the Compelling Confederation,
yeah, I mean, that was like the Fourth War,
and
right?
later the Draconis Combine, but no major campaigns had been waged by them or against them. The situation had become stable enough that in 2511 they were even able to peacefully negotiate an arrangement with their rivals the Taurian Concordat to split the border world of Malagrotta between them. To understand the origins of the war,
they were able to peacefully negotiate? Sorry, like, it's not even just them and the Taurian Concordat, it's more just anyone in BattleTech doing peaceful negotiations. Usually it's some kind of subtlety or subtlety. You know what? No, I'm going to say I pronounced that right and just ignore everything else. I like that.
we need to look back at the reforms made by Simon Davian after taking office as the Federated Suns' final president in 2417.
Oh, they were presidents prior?
The realm by this point had become so massive that no bureaucracy could hope to govern it effectively. He thus determined that his nation should be divided at an administrative level into 5 principalities, or marches. The new regions would be the Capellan, Crucis, Draconis, Outer, and Terran marches, each governed by a...
So they're basically going the feudal style of lords leading individualized areas. Which makes sense, except it's also exactly what caused Alexander the Great's empire to collapse. Whenever the person holding them all together died, everyone was at each other's throats, and that's why it becomes a civil war, because as soon as whoever did this dies, they are all going to be at each other's throats. Hell, it might be even sooner than that, for all I know.
Prince who had supreme authority in his region. The head of the Crucis March would be known as the First Prince, first among equals, and later that century officially became a hereditary Davian position. Relative to the rest of the Inner Sphere, this was just the latest in a sweep of changes that were seeing humanity slide further from democracy and towards feudalism. Jumping forwards to the early 26th century, First Prince William Davian ruled the Federated Suns, but had recently suffered a great loss with the death of his son fighting on the Capellan front.
This is one thing I want to know. They keep saying a slide of democracy and feudalism, which, yeah, there are democracies, but then there's also a lot more that are democracies. And I'm wondering how much of this does involve the HPG network at this point. This is one of the interesting things. BattleTech really does a good way of showing the importance of that communication system. They might not always do it well, Dark Age, but at the same time, it's there. It's something that's important. I want to know, when did that develop to the point where it became so much more during Star League era? I don't know if it happened during Star League. Was it before Star League? Was it at this point, but it wasn't as fast? I know jump ships were well around at this point. It's just one of those things I wish I had more individualized information on. But that's way too niche of a topic for Sven to get into, and Tex may actually get to that at some point, but it'll be a while because he has so much on his plate.
His 5-year-old grandson, Alexander, thus became his heir. William was
okay, that's just
40s,
intentional
so there
there.
was no fear of a succession crisis, with plenty of time for Alexander to age
Alexander
and still
a really
other
good
children
conqueror?
besides. Fate, however, had different plans for the Federated Sons. A vicious plague swept over New Evelyn, killing millions, the first prince included. In his dying moments, he reaffirmed Alexander as heir and passed his badges of office to his 2 surviving daughters, Laura Davian and Cassandra Varney Davian. This was taken to mean that he meant for them to act as regents. Both women were intelligent and ambitious individuals, and so to temper the deal, the High Council decided that 5 regents would rule together until Alexander came of age in his 20s. Laura and Cassandra each had 1 pick, while the council...
So there's the 5 regents who are in charge. Oddly enough, the princes weren't the ones immediately killing him, which is honestly what I expected. I cannot speak today. Yeah. So good on them for not immediately backstabbing him with a completely innocent plague. This is all before 2020, people. All before 2020.
Council would put forward the 5th name. Before continuing, let's quickly review who the 5 princes were at the time of William's passing. The Terran March was ruled from Robinson by Charles Latham. On Tancredi IV, Vladimir Kerensky commanded the Draconis March.
Wait, whoa, what was that name?
On Tancredi IV, Vladimir Kerensky commanded the Draconis March, and Nuno Gutierrez was the Outer March Prince on Filtveld. The most powerful was Charles Varney.
Okay. Kerensky was Kurita adjacent. There's something oddly ironic about that, considering much of Star League's programming, I think Gunslinger program, and how they train the ace pilots was literally against the Kurita Ronin. So this is just... They had to be aware when they chose exactly that name for this prince. They had to be aware.
Duke of New Syrtis and Prince of the Capellan March. He was the head of the Varney family, which had been steadily growing in power as rivals to the Davians over the last century. The Cruces March was ruled in theory by the young Alexander, but the regents would wield the power once chosen. At first, it wasn't clear that any of the other princes would hold one of the regencies, as the 5 principalities were very much independent at this point in history. Cassandra made her first power play when she chose as her nominee regent her husband, David Varney, Prince of the Capellan March, an ambitious and cunning man in his own right. By choosing one of the 5 princes, Cassandra had assured that her decisions as regent would have tremendous support in the upper echelons of society. Laura countered this by choosing the respected General Nikolai Rostov, thereby winning the support of the Federated peacekeeping forces. Though their ties were not as close...
They have the political and money side versus the I have all the guns side. But I have guns don't matter if you don't have the money to buy ammunition. Granted, you could usually take it, and I see where the Civil War is starting up.
As the married couple, the two would often vote in the same direction on most matters, at least at first. In the hope of curbing some of the sisters' more aggressive tendencies, the council nominated William's widow, their own mother, Carmen Estevez Davian, as the 5th regent. Their hope was short-lived, however, when the faltering health of Carmen forced her to retire to her homeworld for the remainder of her life. As she left, she gave Laura Davian full authority to vote on her behalf, effectively doubling her influence among the regents.
And that definitely sets up the beginning of a battle, because if they're that competitive, they were at a stalemate before, now they're not. The best part is, I could easily see someone looking at this going, this is fine, and not realizing that hyper-ambitious people given power over worlds to decide the fate of are going to be hyper-competitive assholes who have the fate of worlds on their plate and for fun. Because I don't even... It's obvious from the outside looking in, but these kind of decisions have been made in a vacuum without anyone being aware of the consequences. While they seem obvious on the outside, it's not on the inside, and it just makes so much sense that I'm kicking myself because, like, why? But I also understand why, because it does make sense. I wish there was more things about this age in BattleTech, because I would love to hear more of these stories.
The squabbling began almost immediately when the Varneys moved to have Alexander betrothed to their daughter, Cynthia, who would in turn be named as the heir apparent. This was aggressively opposed by Laura, but succeeded in part when Rostov supported the betrothal, if not the immediate naming of an heir. This was a politically savvy move by him, and the first sign that he had his own ambitions and the mind to achieve them. By agreeing
because
to the
he's
proposal,
not the only player
he
along with the
ingratiated
daughters.
himself with the Varnays and bought time for himself and Laura to make their own plans.
He is along with them.
He correctly reasoned that the Varnays would not be so cutthroat in their pursuit of power if they believed they had a route through marriage. The political balance swung further in Laura's favour when she used...
See, that part right there, you won't be so cutthroat if there's a way to power through marriage. That is most of politics in feudal societies. And much of the Dark Age? I have Mochi on the mind. Much of the Dark Age in humanity's history was literally, I have power, I could invade you. But if my son marries your daughter, we both win and we don't have to go to war and lose tons of money. We both get to be even richer. And I mean, if you happen to die, maybe slip by accident, I mean, it's not a bad thing. Yeah, that is literally the entire thought process of, it's not going to be as bad if we get power completely consensually. And if that seems sketchy, yeah. But that's literally the thought process. So this is a perfectly rational decision for someone in a feudal society. I mean, it's space feudalism, but it's still feudalism.
Carmen's vote and Rostov's support to elect herself as the new prince, the term was the same regardless of gender, of the Draconis March after Kerensky died childless. But the Varnays were not bested by this maneuver. And
it must be more than one Kerensky in the family then, just not him specifically. Okay, that's a little disappointing.
In 2515 proposed Nikolai Rostov as the replacement prince for the Terran March after an HAF raid had wiped out the Leighton family. For fear of alienating her supporter, Laura agreed, but from this point on, Rostov would be the deciding vote on all issues. At first, the regions contented themselves to stay out of each other's way as they steadily increased their own power and influence, but things started to develop at an increasing pace when Carmen Estevez Davian passed away in 2518.
Oh.
With Laura and Rostov occupied, repelling Kurita and Terran raids on their own borders, the
because they're still fighting
the
outside like the original point of March.
The High Council next. Fabricating evidence against numerous members, they began the so-called treason trials, gutting that government body and leaving only those loyal to themselves. Also left untouched was any politician with ties to the Terran March, as they continued to court Rostov's support. The High Council of the Federated Sons was so cowed by this that they never nominated a replacement for the position of 5th Regent. Laura insisted that
they got Avalon, New Avalon, right next to Numenor. Is there a Gondor on here? Oh, there's El Dorado. Is this just like the famous cities of history around here or something that I just don't know all of them? Arcadia. Okay, I don't see there's probably a few more in there that I'm just missing. Is there an Atlantis? There probably is somewhere. Really? How did they get away with that? Because, and I'll be completely honest, they might not be as litigious as Disney, but the estate of Tolkien is very much aware of exactly what they can do. That is something they definitely slipped in there, and I'm kind of surprised they haven't removed it, because that is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Because that is a very specific word. I'm not going to tell anyone, but, I mean, just as long as no one watching this sees it, I might want to cut this out for safety's sake, because then I'm a party to a crime, and I would like not to do that. It won't be that big a deal. It's not like they're Disney. Disney would go after you. And ironically, they probably would.
That her right to vote on her mother's behalf remained even in death, which the Varnays were obviously opposed to. Nikolai, meanwhile, was continuing to grow his own reputation by repeatedly defeating HAF invaders.
Yep, that was a Gemini
he'd become less active in the governing of New Avalon, preferring instead to stick to the Terran March.
He's going to break away entirely, isn't he?
Legend. Using his new fame to her advantage, Laura was able to contrast his successes against recent Varnay failures on the Capellan front in order to build support for a proposal that would see Rostov made First Marshal of the entire FBF. In an error of judgment, Cassandra voted against this to protect her husband's reputation, who was still busy fighting at the front, but in so doing pushed Rostov back into Laura's camp. It was the Varnays who moved first to break the stalemate that had developed. In 2524, Alexander was taken from his home on New Avalon to New Syrtis under the guise of touring the realm,
and then
he
never
had
returned.
Ostensibly been kidnapped. Once secured in the Capellan March, they hurriedly married him to their daughter and waited for the young couple to produce a Varnay heir to the throne. In response, Laura shot many when
How old was he when this happened? I can't keep track of dates and ages, so probably old enough, or they were willing to wait a long time.
She arrived on New Avalon with a powerful army at her back. She had managed to conclude a peace agreement with the Curitans, allowing her to take the fight to the Varnay faction,
because they had wrapped up
with
their
the puppet
fighting early,
councillors left after the treason trials. After carrying out her retribution, she can now claim de facto leadership over 2 of the marches and all of the military forces within them. Rostov stirred himself too in support of Laura, and they began preparations for a civil war. Nuno Gutierrez would remain officially neutral throughout the war. His own principality was too vulnerable on the periphery to get involved, though he would have to placate the Varnays on occasion, as they were some of his key trading partners. To weaken the
I'm honestly a little surprised he didn't try. Islamabad knows that. They just put all the names in here. I'm a little surprised he didn't try and trade more with the Terran hegemony. Not the Terran hegemony, sorry. The Taurian Concordat, because it's an enemy you know is willing to shoot you in your face, which is still probably safer than the ally at your back with a knife. You know when the enemy's going to shoot you. They're probably safer. I'm honestly surprised they didn't do that as a way to establish the safety of their area. Actually, I'll be fully expecting someone down in the comments to tell me, yeah, no, they actually did that as well. But, it's really not. It's the Age of War writ miniature, and yet somehow larger than most of the battles have actually been so far, now that I think about it.
Varnay claim, Laura began an aggressive propaganda campaign accusing them of kidnapping the young prince. To counter this, David took Alexander on a tour of the Capellan March, but in May of 2525, the news that the Varnays had been waiting for arrived. Cynthia had given birth to a son. They had, however, misjudged one crucial part of their plan, the loyalty of their own daughter. Cynthia had become aware of her father's intent to kill her husband and began conspiring to see him freed.
Well now, that is an aspect I wasn't expecting. Because frankly, killing him is, it makes sense. If you're in the power, you don't want to be the puppet master. You want to be the master flat out. And again, hyper-competitive people who are probably psychotic and sociopathic, psychopathic, take your pick. This makes perfect sense in that form of rationality. To everyone else going, if you just hadn't tried to kill him, he would have been a good puppet leader. And probably a lot easier than anything else. It's still dickish, but you could make the argument. Now it's just full-on civil war, which they were already going to do, but it just makes it harder on you. But again, you wouldn't want to do anything that would make it easier because said reasoning of being ledic.
Operations began on numerous worlds as word spread of the new heir's birth, providing the perfect opportunity for Alexander to give his captors the slip and disappear into exile with a tiny band of loyal followers. This final chapter of pre-war build-up was punctuated by the invasion of Davian troops into the Capellan March.
Good timing.
It might be expected that other surrounding nations would have played a part in the war, taking advantage of Davian vulnerability. In actuality, the Draconis Combine was entering the most peaceful period in its history, and the Terran hegemony was increasingly adopting the role of galactic conciliator. The Capellan Confederation was ruled by the bloodthirsty tyrant Calvin Liao, but he had his sights set on Andurian. The Taurian Concordat realised they had more to lose than gain by getting involved, plus the Outworlds Alliance and United Hindu Collective continued their attitude of armed neutrality. Therefore, the Davian...
Oh yeah, and I know Hindu Collective was later absorbed into it, so that hadn't happened yet. Which is probably better for them in all honesty. And the Taurian Concordat making a very smart choice of saying, nope. That was the right choice.
The Davian Civil War remained a strictly internal affair. The war began when Nikolai and Laura moved forces across the border into Varnay territory. The first target for the Davian soldiers was the world of Cluane. Rostov's troops, consisting of the Terran Brigade and the elite Vale Rangers, had years of experience fighting under him, and were veterans of many battles against the Terran hegemony. On many occasions they outfought the numerically superior Varnay militia. Nikolai was also able to use a strategy of feints to draw Varnay forces into a trap. Early on in the war, he withdrew from Salem in the face of fresh reinforcements and retreated to Torkot. Thinking they had him on the run, he was pursued, but when the Varnay forces arrived, they found the main population centres deserted and key infrastructure and food supplies destroyed. David Varnay himself departed to take personal command of what he believed would be a decisive battle in the war. What he hadn't anticipated was that Rostov was deliberately avoiding the fight until the Varnay invaders had become complacent in their defence around the starport.
That's a decisive battle, right? When he literally put himself... And this is why it then turns... Okay, so it turns into a new phase, yeah.
When Varnay was only a few hours from landfall, Rostov launched a surprise raid that caught the Capellan March militia mid-preparations and devastated their strength. When David arrived, he quickly assessed that his position was untenable and organised an orderly retreat.
Oh, he actually got to retreat.
His vengeance would come only a few weeks
Was
later
not
at
expecting that.
Otakus, where the Davian faction was dealt a heavy blow. Nikolai Rostov was killed in a trivially small engagement during the invasion of that world, robbing the FPF of their finest commander. Varney used this.
Honestly, that is not how I expected this to go. I expected to go, okay, so he did all this stuff, and then he kind of got into this big battle, and no, small engagement, and the big battle that was like, yeah, here's the trap. Is like, oh, well, we should pull back. And then he did. Was not expecting that. I was expecting more actual things to happen. But then again, I mean, that's not bad planning in general, and all the fighting
victory to incite several key members of the opposing army to desert along with their regiments, and the campaign ground to a halt almost as soon as it had begun.
Because it was being held together by him being able to organize it.
The Terran March passed to his son Dmitry Rostov. At the time of his father's death, Dmitry had been fighting behind the lines in the Capellan March. Unable to organize an immediate response, he ordered what troops he could reach to disband and return to their worlds, while he would take an elite cadre of loyal forces and continue to operate in Varney territory.
And he just set up a lot of problems for all the places. He just sent a bunch of heavily armed people who no longer have a purpose, whose land may or may not be challenged by someone internally during a civil war. I'm sure this decision will not backfire at all.
Disrupting supply lines. This slowed the pace of the war significantly, and 25-26 passed without major engagement between the two factions.
So far.
In February of the next year, General Bofors of the Varney militia became ensnared in a trap set by Laura on the planet Nahoni. The 1st New Avalon Dragoons, a light armor regiment under Colonel John Gordon, had been deliberately left in a vulnerable position to lure in an attack, which would in turn leave the invaders vulnerable to a counterattack by Laura's loyalists. An overwhelming force of 2 infantry divisions and a pair of battle mech regiments led by Bofors descended on the world, more than enough to take care of the Dragoons.
They're more than
However,
just the 5 or
both
10
sides were oblivious to one key piece of information. In January, Colonel Gordon had been approached by an unknown youth, who was revealed to be none other than Alexander Davian himself. Gordon's regiment had been chosen for this near-suicide mission because of their open admission of loyalty to the Lost Prince above loyalty to Laura. In the Dragoons, Alexander found the 1st unit willing to join his cause, and a 3rd faction now joined the war. This was all news to Bofors, who waltzed into the swampy terrain of Nahoni, sure that his numerical superiority would carry the day.
And because there's a 3rd faction neither one is aware of yet, yeah...
Colonel Gordon would make them regret their overconfidence by conducting a superb guerrilla campaign, fully utilising the advantages of his hovercraft and jump infantry amongst the bogs to defeat the militia wherever they were encountered.
Damn.
After repeatedly raiding Varney supplies, Bofors was embarrassingly
basically
forced
Vietnam
to
all
surrender
over
to the far smaller New Avalon Dragoons. When the identity of their opponent became known to the Capellan troops, a significant portion switched sides, including some mech units, and the rest were held hostage to be ransomed back to the Varneys.
Damn! Okay, that actually is impressive that they would have that kind of loyalty just to the name, when technically they've been fighting 2 people of legitimacy in there. Because neither one is actually illegitimate at this point. There are less legitimate levels, but I guess he is the most legitimate, and he would make the most sense. It's kind of like finding out you're fighting against a king when you thought you were fighting for the king to begin with. I guess that's, and considering this feudal, that is very good at, actually, it's not even very good, it's literally how that went down. Huh. See, I wish we had more of these moments written down in more narrative fashions, because that seems like it would be such a cool moment in a book. Like the moment where he goes in and is like, you are not fighting on the wrong side. You just haven't realized you fight for me yet. I don't know why I have him sound like that. I have no idea what the kid sounds like. Granted, he has a son of his own. He's fighting a guerrilla campaign, and, you know, he's organizing his own troops who are literally switching from trying to kill him to working for him. I wish I knew how this went down. Would it go down like Aragorn? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. But, I mean, there is a Numenor really close to New Avalon, so I'm not going to say no.
Alexander demanded that his wife be released to join him on Nahoni, and under pressure from the Rump Council in exile on New Syrtis, Cassandra agreed. Bofors returned to Nahoni with Cynthia in tow, and began preparations to withdraw his troops. But 2 days later, Laura Davian's counterstroke fell on the astonished Varney forces, and the fighting began again in earnest.
Because there was
At this point, though,
faction.
Alexander made a serious error in judgment when he attacked one of Laura's units, thereby alerting her to his presence. Though this would again lead to defections and an upswell in the size of his army, it drew him into a pitched battle that his forces could scarcely afford.
These are still
When General
getting forces
Bofors
that you don't
unexpectedly
have.
arrived on his flank, the scale of his blunder was revealed. Only because his two opponents were equally concerned with destroying each other was the young prince able to escape with a small corps of officers and mechs. In orbit, he was able to find more sympathizers, giving him the ability to escape the system, but it was not a strong start to his campaign. However, Alexander's chances of victory were buoyed when Dmitry Rostov learned of the First Prince's survival and threw his support behind him.
Oh!
This action proved divisive in the Terran March, as though his father had been hugely respected and Dmitry was a competent commander himself, the family had no historical ties to the region. Many worlds sided with Laura in the Draconis March. Dmitry found it necessary to move his administrative and military command to Farwell due to uncertain loyalties on Robinson.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if they're not loyal to him and they're loyal to the person who's his ally, and the air quotes are very important there, having any way to prop himself up would be to go behind the most rightful person. So even if it's not what is most politically expedient, it is literally the only politically expedient option for him to still have power. Reality doesn't matter. Honestly, the kid could be horrible for all he cares, because any other option is to give up power to someone who is way more threatening, way closer. And he may or may not like the kid later, I don't know.
The war now entered a
He's
lull
definitely not at this
period,
point.
with each faction withdrawing to consolidate support within their own borders. At first, Laura tried to fight growing pro-Alexander sentiment in the Cruces March, but it soon became apparent that her foothold in the region had been lost, and she retreated to Tancredi. The sisters now sat back and waited to see who their nephew would move against first. The civil war took an unexpected twist when Prince David was killed by anti-Varney rioters on Ashley, which threw the Capellan March forces into disarray.
Was not expecting that either.
Alexander and Rostov saw this opportunity.
And that makes it the second time a major player in this battle was killed off by minor actions unrelated to the overall flow of the war. Yeah, okay. It's weird that it happened twice.
To avoid a two-front war by turning to deal with Laura and the Draconis March while Cassandra struggled to regain control of her own territory. To keep her off balance, Alexander tasked the now General Gordon with conducting a guerrilla campaign against Cassandra while he dealt with his other aunt. This next phase of the war did not go smoothly for the Cruces faction. First of all, Dmitry was more concerned with establishing his dominance within his own Terran March than moving against Laura. He dispatched only token reinforcements to aid Alexander in his push towards Tancredi.
And I called it. It's not about actually supporting him. It's definitely about his own power and getting a good excuse for why people should. I'm not surprised. It honestly makes sense, but I'm not surprised.
Just enough to keep up the facade of their alliance.
Yep.
More troubling was the revelation that Alexander was a poor battlefield commander. His early victories, it seemed, had been more dependent on John Gordon, but now that he was absent, the flaws in Alexander's leadership came to light. The campaign quickly began to drag, and Cruces March forces made very slow progress. They were aided by defections among the Tancredi Warriors Brigade, the core of Laura's military strength, but this was not enough. Finally, in 2533, Rostov joined his strength with Alexander and accelerated their push through the Draconis March, with Dmitry taking most of the credit. They descended in force on Tancredi and came face to face with the elite of Laura's troops. The defenders held their ground in a valiant act of defiance, but eventually the line broke and Alexander closed on Laura's command post.
I'm actually a little surprised here. I thought she'd be able to fight him off, considering all the he isn't a good fighter, or, well, tactician aspects that just came up.
Stepping forwards to meet them was General Katrinka of the Draconis March.
Also, I just realized when I said it was only in there for the legitimacy, he was talking about sending token forces to the sister and not to the son. Yeah, whatever. I made a mistake on that one. Oops. Yeah, never done that before.
Formally surrendered on behalf of the survivors.
Oh!
When they found Laura soon after, they were already too late. The elder of the two sisters had taken her own life, leaving a legacy of destruction and a lengthy suicide note that reaffirmed her defiance even in death. The delays in conquering the Draconis...
I never got that. Like, giving defiance in death when you literally already offed yourself. It's like, oh, how horrible. Now I don't have to deal with keeping her alive. What a shame. I mean, it's not like they cared. She literally spent how many years trying to kill him at this point? Now, she's probably more dangerous if she was alive.
Daily. While he had been held up fighting in the Corwood side of the realm, Cassandra Varney Davian had been marshalling her strength and had finally managed to corner General Gordon and his army.
Oh.
In an ironic twist, the world of Jaipur that had propelled Simon Davian into command of the Federated Sons a century ago and made possible the creation of the Five Marches was now the location for the scene of an atrocity. Though
What?
Alexander moved to Gordon's rescue, he lacked the ability to conduct such an operation, and the general and his troops were forced to surrender to the Varnays.
Oh, he actually got the choice to surrender. And he said site of a massacre. Do they mean before or after this point? If it was before, it was a battle. If it's after, yay war crime o'clock. What's BattleTech without a few war crimes?
Cassandra had most of the prisoners executed en masse in
Called it.
flagrant disregard for the Aries conventions. As news spread,
Oh no, the Aries conventions. Shock, horror. It's not like they've had a ton of violations already to fall back on. Sorry, I know people get annoyed when I keep talking about dropping rocks and breaking the Aries conventions is talked about as the great taboo you never do. And I'm just sitting here going like, yeah, unless the next 5 seconds are, and then she was fucked over by everyone for breaking them, I'm going to say, yeah, no, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
Alexander's own troops went on the rampage, the worst incident being the killing of civilians on Smolensk. The long war was taking a heavy toll on all sides. Beginning in 2534, Cassandra's forces, supported by large groups of Capellan Confederation mercenaries, began a major thrust into the Crucis March.
Mercenaries. Yep, I'm sure the Capella Confederation had no idea this was happening at all. And maybe getting rid of a few of the people who were dissidents who might have fought against them, and maybe taking all the troops that were amassing on their border down into more of their enemy's territory. I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. It might also not have, for all I know. But, I never attribute things to going exactly as you say, because this story has, well, not the story, but like all of BattleTech in general has a habit of saying, here's what happened, and here's what really happened. Because they do it in games to hide a lot of what actually happens, and you more or less treat the game as canon because it's what you actually have to deal with firsthand, and you might as well.
Alexander was unable to mount a defense and found himself being pushed ever
Because
further
he is
back
still a bad
towards
leader,
New Avalon.
militarily.
In an attempt to flank her opponent, Cassandra made the foolhardy decision to enter the United Hindu Collective. Up until this point, they had remained neutral during the Davian Civil War, but now they rose to challenge the invaders. The core of the UHC military was the Messengers of Shiva Regiment, which represented the majority of their battle mech and aerospace fighter strength. Cassandra's forces were intercepted in 2535 on Jodhpur, where the outdated UHC were able to achieve a victory over the Varnays, who they held as hostage until the end of the war.
Damn. So, yeah. She might be a better tactician than her brother Alexander because she seems to get more success out of it. But starting a third front to a war? I mean, technically it's all one front for her because Capellan and Taurian aren't fighting her. On the other hand, she just opened up that new front that she somehow managed to luck out of.
Back on the front line, however, things were not improving for the Crucis March forces. By the end of 2536, the Varnays had made it as far as El Dorado, and now prepared for a direct assault on the capital. Alexander's command on Belladonna could not see a way out of the situation. It was at this moment that Dmitry Rostov arrived and immediately entered into furious debate with Alexander. Both princes felt personally aggrieved by the other, Alexander angry at the lack of support, and Dmitry despairing at the seemingly incompetent boy general.
Okay, maybe I wasn't wrong, and he was giving token support to this guy? Huh. Weird. Usually when I'm wrong, I'm just flat out wrong. Also, I just realized that's Galax. Isn't that the name of the video? This is just a bunch of references over here, isn't it? It's probably just a bunch of references. I don't even get them all.
Nevertheless, they knew Cassandra was the true enemy to them both, and Rostov had a plan to cripple
and
the
those
assault,
are probably the two who fight to the death at the
defense
end
of
of
New
this.
Avalon, and strike out to the flanks of Cassandra's advance. A large force of Vale Rangers was stationed on Smolensk, ready to strike at her supply lines. Alexander was urged to move his troops around the rimward side, and the two forces would regroup behind the
Wait. Her supply lines went over here? Oh, I guess she was invading from this side, or they just have a really large jump point. Maybe that's more sense.
front line. The plan worked flawlessly. The Varnays attempted to withdraw, but were caught recharging in the Meglan system, where Cassandra's fleet was almost completely destroyed.
Damn.
Ultimate victory was denied in this instance, as she was able
Also, I'm just going to point out, remember the Aries convention? All the BattleTechs in the world, sorry, not BattleTechs, BattleMechs in the world won't matter if there's not a single ship to get them off the planet. Yeah, and you can tell they're actually fighting in orbit still because ships destroyed.
able to flee before her ship was disabled.
Warships still sound like they'd be very
She knew
useful.
her cause was lost, though, and escaped with her son into
I'm
the
not sure they
Capellan
built
Confederation
this
with the
Siberia.
remnants of her once mighty army. For the first time, Alexander was now the undisputed first prince of the Crucis March and the Federated Suns, and one of his first acts was to rename the Megalon system to Victoria. His victory was short-lived, however, as he immediately came up against opposition when he began working on the enormous task of rebuilding the devastated principalities. Many clung to the belief that he had no say outside of his own march, and this position was championed by Dmitry Rostov himself. So strong was his position on the matter that
called it because they fought together, they didn't like each other, and he made the accurate decision to think that Alexander was a terrible tactician. No idea if he's a bad politician or not, but considering he's a Davian and he's not, I have an idea who's going to win that duel. Although I've been wrong often enough because apparently side branches are pulled in pretty often.
he was prepared to muster his own forces to protect his right of absolute control in the Terran March. In an ill-fated move to capture a bargaining chip, Rostov dispatched a team to kidnap Cynthia Davian while she was touring the Draconis March.
How many times do they all get hit? I mean, like, first was Alexander being kidnapped to force him to marry Cynthia, Cynthia actually going with him. She was taken captive by her family, which is why he had to negotiate for her to be freed, and then she's being taken again? Apparently the Davian are secretly Mario in there somewhere.
Exactly what transpired is unknown, but sadly, Cynthia was killed during the attempt, and a state of civil war returned to the realm.
Yep.
This was the last thing anyone in the war-weary Federated Suns wanted. Rostov knew a fight was inevitable after the death of Cynthia, but few came to his aid. Rather, there were even defections among his own Veiled
Because
Rangers.
he fucked this up.
Alexander
and because he forgot the entire reason he was allying with them is because he didn't have the will of the people, because he was basically unattached to the area. Yeah, so he allied with the Davian kid, with Alexander, to give himself legitimacy. But when his legitimacy was threatened by Alexander, he decided, well, maybe I don't need to do that. But he still had that lack of legitimacy that initially made him work with Alexander, and that it makes sense. And apparently he forgot that, which admittedly, when the war is more or less over and you don't think you need to worry about it as much because everyone else is dead, yeah. But it still came back to bite him because his initial problem wasn't any of the other princes. It was his own failings by just not having the will of the people behind him. And they're going to fight against him now.
In contrast, arrived on Robinson with an
if you're a good leader if no one
force
listens
of
to you.
Avalon Hussars and Davian guards. Though victory was assured, Davian did the unexpected by seeking out a one-on-one duel with Rostov. His reasons for doing so stemmed from more than just sparing the lives of the soldiers that were dying in the fight.
Is he a better mech pilot than he is a commander? Because that actually might be a very good reason. I'm not expecting that reason, but it'd be nice.
Fighting around him. Alexander's military reputation was less than stellar, with Dmitry having taken most of the credit for the victories at Tancredi and Megalon.
Yeah.
The first prince knew that without a personal accomplishment during the war, he would lack support going forwards, and so...
Oh, he was aware of that? And while this kid might... He's not a kid at this point. While Alexander is definitely not a military leader, the political acumen right there is way more than most people are aware of. And honestly, while Rostov is a very good military leader, apparently, he didn't have the political acumen to figure out, maybe I shouldn't betray the person who's giving me power. Not even just actual military power, which he had plenty of. It was the actual people will listen to you power, which apparently having a gun wasn't enough at this time period because everyone had them. And this kid is already aware of that, so he's doing a risk, because if he dies, well, I'm dead. If he lives and they capture him, he might survive. He's not going to kill himself like everyone else, or maybe he'll survive, and this guy won't actually do that because he wants a hostage. He doesn't seem nearly as bloodthirsty, if more prone to wanting to be in power of himself and not fuck himself over, even if he does that. And if he wins, he gets to say, see, here are my military accomplishments, which he doesn't actually have any of because he's not good at the military side. It actually is a win-win situation for him. He either gets what he wants or it doesn't matter.
Arranged for the duel. Though we know of their reputations as strategic commanders, history does not record the relative prowess of the two as mech warriors. What we do know is that ultimately Alexander would defeat and kill Rostov, ending the war for good. The fight made the new First Prince a legend in the newly reformed armed forces of the Federated Suns, but there were always whispers that a Davian agent had sabotaged Dmitry's mech before the confrontation. The Federated...
I mean, I would be fully surprised if that didn't happen. I'm more surprised it didn't happen to both of them, if anything else.
His Suns underwent significant restructuring in the aftermath of the Civil War. As well as transitioning the old FPF into the new AFFS, over which Alexander appointed himself as First Marshal, he also completely reformed the old principalities into 3 larger regions, with the Draconis and Capellan marches and their rulers clearly defined as being subservient to the Crucis March and the First Prince. Never again would the realm be so divided. Furthermore, at war's end in 2540, the United Hindu Collective peacefully joined the Federated Suns as a semi-autonomous region. The last gasp of the Civil War.
They just willingly joined? At the end of the Civil War? Because they probably thought now is the best point, because they hadn't been fucked over by an entire Civil War, so they're probably a powerhouse in an otherwise depleted nation. That actually would give them a lot of political capital to throw around, I can't speak today, throw around a lot more weight that they wouldn't normally have if they had joined at the height of Davian's power. That actually makes a lot of sense.
The war came in 2565 when Cassandra and David Varney's son Roger crossed the border and began rallying support on Carmax.
They had a son? Oh. Honestly, I forgot all about them.
As he moved towards New Syrtis, he was intercepted on Kigamboni by the 8th Syrtis Fusiliers, and the rebellion was swiftly curtailed. So ended the bloodiest chapter in the Age of War.
Wait, that was the actual end of it? Just that little bit right there? Huh. I honestly was kind of expecting it to go more bloody than that even. Also, that's the map at this time period. Wow. I know they said that Davian was the biggest, but it looks like Steiner by far is, and Lao is pretty huge. The map really does shift later. Kurita growing bigger, Davian expanding, taking a lot of the Terran hegemony. I guess that makes sense that it hasn't been gone yet. Just, wow, that is a very different map that I'm used to. But it's also similar enough that I could tell where things are. Either way, though, we're about to get to my favorite part. The Star League, man. This is like the coolest part. Not the best, not the smartest, but definitely the biggest and shiniest.
War drew to a close, Ian Cameron of the Terran Hegemony invited the leaders of the 2 combatant nations, the Compelling Confederation and Free Worlds League, to a peace conference on Terra. There, the 3 leaders met to hammer out the terms of the ceasefire, and hopefully put an end to the Andurian dispute once and for all.
Because that was going on at
This must have given Albert Marek a sense of deja vu, as it was only 25 years earlier that he had met with Terence Liao's predecessor Calvin on New Delos to conclude the Second Andurian War. On both occasions, Albert, as the head of the Free Worlds League military, had soundly beaten the Liao aggressor, and now sat in the driving seat during the negotiations. However, this time something was different. It was during the New Delos conference that Albert had first met Ian, who was part of the Terran Hegemony attaché for his mother and then Director General.
So they plotted this out early.
During that meeting, Ian had first shared his desire to see an end to the Age of War, and wish for all of humanity to be united. The idea impressed upon the Captain General, and in the ensuing years, the 2 rulers would establish a strong personal friendship. During their correspondence, the question of how to unite the disparate nations was raised. The Third Andurian War, though undesired by Albert Marek, presented just such an opportunity. In the aftermath, Terence Liao was forced to agree to heavy reparations that might threaten to collapse the already shaky Capellan economy. However, Albert then made a proposal that would have been unthinkable to anyone else involved in the war.
He's literally turning the military blunders of his enemy into the starting point of Star League, isn't he? That's kind of brilliant.
He agreed to cede ownership of the contested worlds to the Confederation. Terence Liao's whole impetus for beginning the war was to win personal acclaim at home, and now, quite unexpectedly, he had managed to achieve those goals.
And he achieves them in the way that probably, if he thinks about it, is the most damning. And he would never think about it because not taking it would be worse. He gets everything he wants, but, and that's probably joining Star League next, which is all the security and everything they care about, which gives them their option, but they don't need to worry about it as much as they get to build up, which is what happens under Star League, except for the periphery, which gets fucked. And the Liao side gets the win they need, while knowing that they're getting it at the largesse of the people giving it to them who they already lost to, or effectively couldn't win on their own. So they can't really risk doing it again without building up a lot more, and that would be noticed. So that's kind of brilliant. It's a very much poisoned gift. You get exactly what you want, and now you can't deal with anything else. Because he knows he's not good enough. I mean, he also could just be a crazy asshole, which I'm pretty sure he is. But that might come later. And by that point, if Star League is established, which I'm assuming this is the initial impetus for, they would be the ones beating him down instead of anything else.
With the transfer of the Andurian systems, it was hoped that further bloodshed between the two nations could be avoided.
I mean, for
and
now.
It was at this point Ian Cameron raised the issue of a further alliance between the three powers. Terrence was at first skeptical that such an ambitious diplomatic venture could succeed, but was finally won over by the promise of favoured nation status that would help bolster his economy. The
And he
Andurian
needed
peace
that because
treaty
of the
signed in
reparations he
March
had
of
to pay.
2556 therefore included a secret sub-treaty, the Clasped Hands Agreement, that outlined their intention to continue talks on the formation of a unified tri-member state.
I'm sorry, I just noticed. Is there really a planet called Nuke Us? I know it's probably not pronounced that way, but I don't care. It's amusing to me. Oh my god. Hey, where you gonna go? I'm going to Nuke Us. Age of War for you, man.
In June of that year, the three leaders signed the Treaty of Geneva that would lay the foundations for the Star League. Many concessions
So it wasn't
and
all
agreements
at
were
once,
reached
okay.
by this document that outlined how the economy, bureaucracy and military of this new government would function, as well as what was expected of the member states and provided in return. But one of the most significant inclusions was that House Marek would become the hereditary ruler of the Free Worlds League. Up until this point, the League was the realm that had the least ties to a specific great house. But as far as the Camerons and future Star League...
So the Geneva, which became the precedent for Star League, actually gave Marek direct control of it as the primaries. Okay. And that's probably why his personal power is in here, because on the one hand, the kinder way to interpret it is, well, I mean, someone else might not agree, and then we lose peace. Someone who's probably more accurate would look at it as like, so I don't need to pay for war against a bunch of idiots, and nobody's going to internally challenge me. Okay, I like this.
were concerned, the Mareks were now the sole inheritor of power in that region of space.
For now.
It was as well that this agreement was reached at Geneva because upon Albert Marek's return to the Free Worlds League, he was faced with a government that was outraged that he would willingly trade away almost an entire province to a mortal enemy that millions of people had lost their lives fighting over the last 2 centuries. There was, however, little they could do to reverse his decision, as the Captain Generalcy had increased in power since its inception, and Albert had been entrusted to that position by Parliament. Meanwhile, Ian Cameron continued to act as galactic conciliator on the various disputed worlds across the Inner Sphere. This resulted in a slew of worlds that were peacefully divided between 2 nations, but from which the Terran hegemony would receive a marginal cut going forwards. Given the disputed worlds were often ones with valuable industry or resources, the cumulative total of these worlds expanded the hegemony's revenue streams considerably.
They got money coming in from the only places they care about. They're not the ones running the worlds. They just get exactly what they want out of it. And it gives them places to say they have a footprint well beyond their actual footprint itself. It looks like they also have the reverse over here where people had footprints in them. So establishing ties that are on a more peaceful level with people. Because everyone's trying to steal from them, so if they flat out give it to people and sell it, it's probably easier. Which is probably how they got into it to start with. Conceal it. This is good statesmanship, if you have the resources to work with it.
And helped to offset the fact that their nation was boxed in without room for traditional expansion. Their most successful achievement came in 2558, when the troubled border between the Lyran Commonwealth and the Free Worlds League was resolved. House Marek had been able to yet again establish a salient deep into the Protectorate of Donegal, but this time were determined to hold on to their gains. The signing of the Tharkat Accords in 58 confirmed the Free Worlds acquisitions, but the Accords were about far more than some disputed border worlds. By now, word of the Treaty of Geneva had spread throughout the Inner Sphere, and the question on everyone's lips was, would this new alliance lead to an end to the constant wars, or lead directly into one larger than ever before?
Yes. Yeah, there's really no other way to put that. The answer was yes. It did both at different times, but yes is completely the only way to answer that accurately. I was going to make a joke, but no, that's just flat out exactly how it went down.
Ian Cameron was determined to see the Star League succeed, and to that end had been courting the Lyran Commonwealth for the best part of a decade, even before Terence Liao had sat down at the negotiating table.
So they were the first people
the
to
rise
reach
of a
out
new
to.
Archon, Trachel Steiner, provided the opportunity he'd been waiting for, as she was much more amenable to the idea than her predecessor. The hegemony and Commonwealth had been steadily increasing economic ties, which had led to a boom in the industrial might for both nations, now far outstripping any rivals.
And because they had a lot of the same tech which they stole initially from them, it was probably very compatible to even start to do those kind of discussions because it's basically using the same information, which I'm sure they just kind of hand-waved away and didn't ask any questions about it because that would be awkward and might actually require retaliation, which at this point they're trying not to do. Probably did prior to this, though, a lot.
However, there was real concern that the Lyran economy would become subservient to the Star League once formed. Nevertheless, the LCAF stood to gain massively from the sharing of military technology and expertise offered by the current HAF and future Star League Defense Force. The signing of the Tharkat Accords was met with similar derision among the Lyran Estates General as was offered by the Free World's Parliament, but just as before, the deed was already done, and despite one abortive attempt at completely opening up the realm to outside trade going wrong, after tweaks to the controls on the Lyran economy, the Commonwealth soon found itself making enormous financial gains. This could not have been more untrue for the Federated Suns, who around this point were in deep economic trouble. The damage suffered during...
Never heard that before. It's probably worse than normal, but it's kind of the joke. As much as the Steiners are rich, Davion is not. Granted, the reason is different, but it's still a similar outcome.
The Civil War had cost them dearly, and though Alexander Davion's reforms were going some of the way to getting the realm back on track, they were still in financial trouble.
So he's a better statesman
most,
than
except
these
for
military
Cameron
generals.
And his co-conspirator Albert Marek, their poor situation had actually been exacerbated by the actions of those foreign realms, with the goal of making the new league an appealing prospect, in much the same way that they had convinced the Capellan Confederation to join. Alexander, however, was determined that if the Federated Suns were to join, it would be on their own terms. By 2567, the recovery efforts were well enough underway that Davion was prepared to accept membership as an equal party in the Star League, and on October 27th signed the New Avalon Accords, leaving the Draconis Combine as the last holdout. In the end, convincing Hihiro Kurita did not provide any great challenge.
What?
He had been agreeable to the idea since he had first heard of it, but needed a way to sell it to his people. Ian Cameron was...
He was? I get the entire sell it to the people thing, but I'm more surprised. But this is right at the time period where they enter the state of actual stability and were not warlike for once. So it kind of makes sense because at any other point it wouldn't. But here, because they had entered a peaceful phase, establishing it as something that's just going to continue without as much input makes sense. Okay, never mind. In hindsight, that does make a lot more sense. I'm just, not expecting that.
The same offer he had made Alexander. If a war between the Federated Suns and Draconis Combine ever broke out, the Terran hegemony would take up arms against the aggressor. The Treaty of Vega was signed on August 15th, 2569, and secured the sixth and final great power as a member of the Star League. 2 years later, the leaders of the 6 member states met on Terra to make a historic announcement. On July 9th, 2571, the Lords of the Great Houses signed the Star League Accords, formally bringing the new superstate into existence. It was a pronouncement that promised to usher in a new golden age of humanity, where our species would reach its technological and societal epoch. But reality is rarely so straightforward. Immediately after signing the Accords, copies were dispatched to the 4 major periphery nations. Cameron's dream was to unite all of humanity after all. Over the last 2 centuries, the Taurians and Rimwalders had been joined in 2417 by the Outworlds Alliance, an isolationist movement formed in response to the constant bloodletting exhibited by the Innisphere nations.
Understandable,
and in 2530 by the Magistry of Canopus,
they were around back then?
state formed by disgruntled MechWarriors, where the pursuit of personal happiness was valued above all else. Each of these 4 periphery powers had a bad history with their Innisphere neighbours, and a strong sense of independence. It is not surprising that not one of them agreed to join the nascent Star League. But Ian Cameron had not come this far to be stopped now.
We're going to join us in peace or else, and we're very much fans of the else option.
Most historians state the end of the Age of War to coincide with the end of the Third Andurian conflict.
Yeah, also, it's just like they said, does it go to more peace or to more wars greater than ever? And the answer is yes, just in different places. The Inner Sphere main houses became more peaceful-ish, while everything around them that had been avoiding all the bullshit becomes the target of said bullshit.
But the 15 years of peace that followed were as much an epilogue to that century and a half of violence as they were a prelude to the Star League. Regardless of where you draw the line between eras, all of those years of war would barely hold a candle to what would soon follow with the Star League's first major undertaking, the commencement of the Reunification War.
And for what I'm certain is going to be a recurring thing that I'm sure everyone's surprised about, setting up one giant cool thing is also followed by doing something that you think makes sense at the time and then F's everyone over all the time after that. I don't even. It makes sense. The Star League was exactly what they needed. And frankly, if they had applied a more peace-minded strategy, which is what he was initially trying to do to stop the Age of War, it might have eventually worked to bring in the periphery nations. Instead, he was like, you know what? No. Join us. And die. I mean, they built them up afterwards, so it wasn't as bad as some of the other bullshit that happened, but it did set the tone and set the stage for everything that's going to happen next. Everything about their fall was created here, and every part leading up to it. And this entire series Sven did is one really good point about how every single step along the way was leading up to what came next to it as a series of, well, Rube Goldberg-esque machines building up to every piece of bullshit that happens. It all leads into each other. And this is a really well set up system where the entire lore has sense to it. And I love it, but it's also infuriating because you want to just slap a bitch and go, stop doing the stupid. But they're being stupid in believable ways. So yeah, I like this. I like hearing this, but it is infuriating, but fun to hear because it's well done infuriation, which is weird when I say it that way. Huh. Yeah. Basically what I'm saying is this is a blast. I had fun. I might actually just watch the rest of these on my movies. I don't want to wait anymore, man. I just want to binge these, and I might very well do that. So if you haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. If I put something else on next week, it's because I did end up just binging these and I don't want to wait because I want to see what happens next. I just might do that rather than reacting. I just want to see it. If I do that, something else will come up. Maybe the video about finally building that goddamn PC that's taken me over an entire week now despite everything breaking. Yeah. More importantly, if you haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. If there's something else you want to see, let me know. I'll see you guys then. Adios.